You already know something feels off. You follow the standard instructions, you put in the hard work, but you find yourself expending much more effort just to maintain a position that used to be easy. That friction isn't a psychological failing or personal anxiety. It is an incredibly accurate calibration signal. You are reacting to a mechanical shift in your environment, and it is worth reading correctly. It is comforting to think we are just looking at a resilient system temporarily disrupted by unusual political weather, but the evidence points to a structural reveal. The gap between what institutions officially claim and how they actually behave is widening past the point where attention management can close it. The divergence between the official story and operational reality is a one-way path. If the core architecture of these institutions is transforming, waiting for a return to the old baseline isn't patience, it's direct alignment with the failure itself. To read this environment accurately, we have to split it in two. First is the paper state, the formal, documented narrative of stability, the official rules, and the optimistic projections maintained by our institutions. This diagram illustrates the gap. Opposite the official narrative is the kinetic state, how power is actually exercised. Look at the shattered pillar. Removing local redundancies eliminates stability circuit breakers. The system is optimizing for its own failure cascade. Expecting these brittle, hyper-centralized institutions to somehow rescue themselves, or rescue you, is a misallocation of your attention. The macro collapse of this architecture is no longer a problem you need to actively monitor. It is noise. You need to forcefully evict that noise, leaving only the pressurized silence where you have control. Into that quiet space, we install autonomous internal coherence. This becomes your primary operating system moving forward. We call this process individual load management. It is the active, mechanical reduction of your dependence on any centralized system in order to maintain your own foundational stability. Right now, the external environment is perfectly calibrated to generate maximum reactive noise. It pushes escalating enforcement signals and economic stress specifically to trigger erratic, highly emotional decision-making. To survive that, you have to engineer a structural response. You reduce the sheer volume of external inputs that demand your immediate attention or immediate compliance. You establish your behavioral choices well in advance. When the environment gets loud, you aren't reacting to a current stimulus. You are simply executing a prior commitment. When you replace momentary willpower with rigid structural design, a hostile environment loses its leverage. It gets neutralized into predictable background static. This individual isolation strategy actually mirrors what is happening in the highest tiers of the macroeconomy. There is a measurable divergence called the pricing gap. The public price broadcasts institutional success stories, while the private price quietly bets on institutional failure. This chart shows how that divergence plays out. The smooth top line represents official stability claims, but the jagged line below shows actual money movement. Capital isn't flowing toward a centralized state, it's aggressively fragmenting away from it. Achieving internal coherence alongside this capital flight is a structural engineering task. It is not a test of heroic resistance, and it is certainly not a form of political activism. The goal is to reach an autonomous operational state. You build a closed-loop unit capable of functioning outside the perimeter of centralized failure. True systemic insulation happens at a very specific threshold, when your personal operational boundaries become harder and much more reliable than the laws of a failing state. The timeline for this transition is highly compressed. The divergence between the official illusion of control and operational reality cannot stretch indefinitely. We are approaching a forcing function. This will likely be a major economic reporting cycle or a high-profile legal failure where the accumulated cost of maintaining the fiction of stability can no longer be serviced. When this forced resolution hits, the system will look for backup mechanisms to stabilize itself. But because those localized redundancies were already stripped away, the failure will cascade. Anyone who continues to rely on the paper state narrative when that forcing function activates will absorb the full, unmitigated kinetic impact of the collapse. The individuals who have already moved their foundational stability away from the center aren't predicting the date of the failure. They are simply removing themselves from the list of people who will be hit by it. By establishing internal coherence now, you are reducing the number of external variables that can trigger your own collapse. Severing your reliance on the braking system now moves you out of the line of fire. It isn't a political statement. It's a mechanical decoupling that allows you to function when the central coordination fails. Reject the urge to consume macroeconomic news. Stop debating systemic flaws online, and stop seeking political consensus regarding an ongoing collapse. Your personal survival architecture begins right now. The exact moment the screen goes black, execute one immediate act of prior commitment and close your loop.